eliciting an emotional response, as we saw in the example, what are some of the additional benefits of using stories as language learning tools? Wenlin, can you bring up the chat box as well? Then why don't you just do the text side from here, since it's not working terribly well? What are some of the additional benefits, do you think, of using stories? Could you type into the chat box what you think are some of the additional benefits of using stories for teaching language? Wenlin?
Yes, I'm typing. So
okay. I can't see the chat box though.
yeah, so what do you think are the additional benefits, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not seeing your chat box, Wenlin.
Could you maybe you have to like double click so that you can actually see the screen in a smaller screen. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay.
I think we do have some responses over here from some of our attendees.
It's relating to the character in the story. Great, thank you, Christine. Any other benefits that you can think of using stories to teach language? We know they create an emotional response.
Children will learn moral.
Yes, lovely.
Good value, good moral, good value.
Lovely, values and morals. Thank you very much. That's great. Anything else that you guys can think of?
Learn new words.
Yeah, they will learn new words. Thank you. That's great. Okay, well, let's have a look in some depth at some of these values. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide, Wenlin. Okay, first of all, stories provide us with a wonderful break from all the sort of formal, traditional methods of language teaching. I have never met a child or an adult in my life who doesn't enjoy listening to a good story. And so stories, instead of doing drills and exercises and boring, you know, like write 10 sentences using these words, if we say to children, oh, here's a great story, and the story contains interesting and exciting language, this is a wonderful way to get away from the boring ways of teaching language and to engage children in an interesting way that provides a context for the language and that encourages genuine communication. So stories provide a break from traditional methods, and it's a break that most children really, really enjoy. Okay, next one, Lynn. So the First Steps program is based on 75 original stories that have been written specifically for children for whom English is not their first language. All of the stories are engaging, and you can read them with the children many, many times without them getting bored. In fact, young children often love to hear the same story again and again. I have a little grandson who's 2.5 years old. He always wants to hear Fireman Sam's story again and again, the same story. And children love that repetition, but children won't love it if you say, let's write 10 past 10 sentences again and again. So stories have this special magic, this special power. You can read them many, many times and children won't get bored with them. And I think that's a real benefit. And we can have the animated versions of the stories as we have in First Steps. We have the digital versions, we have print format. So lots of different ways to repeat the language, to memorize the language without the kids getting bored. And I think that's another real value. Okay, Wenlin. Next up, and one of you just said, the children can learn words. Stories are full of vocabulary. They're full of words. So what better way to teach vocabulary than to use stories? We need a vocabulary, or children need as well, of 1,000 to 3,000 words to carry out everyday conversations. So that is a lot of words. And in order to be able to become more fluent users of language, more advanced, they need 4,000 to 10,000 words. So children have a lot of words to learn, particularly if it's not their first language. And one of the benefits of stories is that stories allow vocabulary, allow new words to be presented in context, in the context of a story. So if we give a child a list of words, let's say we give them 20 words and we say, learn these words, I'm going to test you next lesson, they might be able to learn them, but then they'll quickly forget them. Whereas if we present the words in the context of a story, they're much more likely to be able to remember them and to use the words in the correct context, in the correct way. And again, I see this all the time with my little grandson who is just learning to talk. He picks up new words every single day, and a lot of those words come from the stories that we share with him. So this is precisely what we do in the First Steps program. The vocabulary in the stories is carefully controlled and it's reviewed, and there are suggested activities in the program guides for the teachers to use, which will allow you opportunities to practice the vocabulary. So it's very nicely designed like that. Okay, next one. Grammar. Who loves grammar? Does anyone like grammar? I personally think it's really boring again. No child really enjoys learning grammar, and there are a few reasons for that. One of them is it's very difficult for children to relate to grammar. If you think of a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old and you're trying to teach them past tense, it's a very abstract concept. And we know from research that children of that age can only really learn concrete things that they can relate to. They're not ready to learn abstract concepts between 4 to 7-year-olds. So we need to have things that are very concrete for them so that they can understand them. And grammar is a difficult concept for young children, as well as being boring and abstract, it's difficult. If we're teaching prepositional language or we're teaching different pronouns, it's very, very hard. And there's actually no need to teach children the language to describe language. We don't need to teach them the word pronouns or the word prepositions. It's better if they pick up the grammar and the structure of language and the syntax of language through contextualized language. In other words, through the medium of books and stories. So we present the story. In every story, there are examples of grammar. Wenlin, next slide, please. So we see here just one page taken out of one of the 75 books. Danny Duck and Daddy Duck are playing hide and seek. So we can see immediately we have an example of the present continuous tense, and we have an example of subject-verb agreement. Danny Duck is playing, but Danny and Daddy are playing. So it's much better to teach those grammatical points through an interesting story than to try to teach subject-verb agreement through 10 examples in a fill-the-blank exercise. Similarly with the present continuous tense. So we're presenting grammar in the context of stories, and the children will pick it up really quite naturally. Okay, Wenlin.
Danny Duck.
Okay, So stories also build literacy skills. Now, First Steps is first and foremost a language program, but one of the other benefits is that it builds reading and writing skills. And the program guide actually encourages the children to use prediction, decoding, comprehension skills, sequencing, summarising, evaluating, all of those different reading skills that help children to become confident and competent readers. So they will pick up through the First Steps program all of these different skills. And there are some really quite neat activities in the program guides for building the children's literacy skills and practicing these in a fun and interesting way. Okay, next one, Lynn. So stories appeal to children's social and emotional intelligence as well. They encourage understanding, they encourage empathy, they encourage and support children's personal, social, and emotional development. And I know if you're teaching in an early childhood context in Singapore, PSE, personal, social, emotional development, is part of the syllabus and is considered very important. So children learn all of these skills, all of these values by thinking about and commenting on the characters in the various stories. So the stories support the development of personal, social, and emotional development. We just have a quick example of that. Basically, we have a story in the first level of readers called Say Please, Baxter. And there's a little boy in the story and he's always asking for things. He's always saying, I want this, give me that, as we hear real children do all the time, and forgetting to say please. And this story promotes the idea of being important to say please and thank you for things. So it's promoting an important social skill for the children in quite a cute story, really. Okay, Wenlin, next one. That's great. So you can see an example here where we're looking at self-management. Give me that box, says Baxter. Say please, says Dad. And he doesn't want to. He's very stubborn like this. In the end of the story, he actually learns his lesson and he learns to say please in a nice way. So he learns good manners. Now we can say to children, say please, say please, say please, and often they don't listen. But if they see the example through the context of a story, if they depersonalize what you're asking them to do, they will pick up these good manners. They will remember the story and they will learn that lesson for themselves. They learn why it's important to say please and thank you for things. Okay, that's great. Next one, Lynn. Good. So another benefit is stories provide a vehicle for teaching values. And one of you lovely people said this before, to teach morals and values. And a really good example of this is, of course, fables, the genre of fables. Aesop was the first person to write fables. They're usually stories with animal characters. And there's usually a moral lesson and a good value embedded within the story. So these fables are quite powerful ways. And in the First Steps program, there are some fables. There's an example here, The Fox and the Crow. It's one of the level 3 stories. And what happens is the frog is out for a walk one day. He drops his wallet. The crow finds it, but instead of returning the wallet, he picks it up and he quickly flies up into the tree. But the frog's clever and he spots the crow, and the crow said, oh, no, it's fine, I was going to return it. And he's actually telling a lie. He's not being honest. So we have an important message in this very short, simply told fable about the importance of being an honest person. Again, it's an important value to teach the children. And all throughout the First Steps, each and every one of the 75 stories has a social, emotional learning value or moral, which we can use to teach the children important values. I think that's really, really quite important for children's holistic education generally. Okay, Wenlin. Just keeping an eye on time here. Okay, so I think this is probably one of the most exciting benefits of using stories. Stories appeal to children's imagination. I remember when I was a child, I used to often read in bed at night, and I'd always read adventure stories. In those days, they were the Enid Blyton stories, not so popular now, but I loved to imagine myself as part of the story and to think about, you know, what I would do in the situation of the characters. And I think stories are great catalysts for developing children's imagination. And in a lot of language syllabuses and school syllabuses these days, we're telling children, you know, or we're trying to meet the aim of being creative. You'll hear a lot, or develop creative thinking skills among children. It's a big thing in education now. And I think there is no better way to do that than to use the medium of stories, because stories get children thinking creatively. They're quite magical, they capture children's attention, they transport them to different worlds. They also lend themselves to role play, and I think Christine earlier on mentioned we can use props that relate to characters in stories to role play stories. On this slide, we can see one of the level 2 stories from the First Steps program, Snorri in the Snow. This is an Icelandic tale, and many of our stories in the First Steps program are set not necessarily in Singapore or Malaysia or China, but they're set in lots of different countries around the world. So this helps children to realize that there are children like them all around the world. They have different practices, different cultures, different customs, but there is also a thread of commonality there between them. So next one, Madeline, please. Lynn, thank you. So stories help children make sense of the world around them. And this is another benefit. One of the things that young children in the 4 to 7-year-old bracket have to face is the act of going to school, the first time they go to kindergarten or the first time they go to primary school. And it can be a very scary experience for young children. We have a lovely story in level 2 about a little Japanese girl called Keiko. She's just arrived in America and she has to join a school. And it's all about how the other children in the class look after her and how she shares about Japan in the story and makes friends within the class. So this helps to make sense of things that our students, that our children will have to face themselves. It helps them to access those feelings, to talk about the feelings, to have a sort of a pre-run of the experience before they have to experience it themselves. And stories in this way can really help children to feel more calm and settled and more confident about facing new situations and understanding the world around them, because young kids have a lot of new experiences every day to cope with. So I think that's quite an important value of stories as well, another benefit. Okay, Wenlin. Okay, as I mentioned very briefly, stories help bridge cultural divides and help develop an understanding, not just of their world, but the world globally. On the slide, you'll see a selection of stories. I put 2 level 1, 2 level 2, 2 level 3. The vegetable market is set in India. Rita and the rice is set in China. Grandad is set in Greece. Snorri and the Snow is in Iceland. The Emperor and the Baby Bird is another story set in China. And Hold On Tight, I think, is set in Iran or in Kazakhstan. So you've got stories in the First Step series with different settings from all over the world. And I think that's really interesting for the kids, because many of the reading schemes and many of the series of stories that I've seen before tend to be very Eurocentric. They tend to be very European. If you think of Oxford Reading Tree, are you familiar with that? Very European stories. And while they're great stories, it's nice to see a series of books which actually looks a little more globally at experiences around the world. Okay, Wenlin. Okay, now you might be worrying at this point and think, some of these stories might be a little bit difficult for some of my learners, because if you're from a country such as China, and I know we have some of our Chinese teachers here today and colleagues here today, you know, not all of the children will necessarily already be able to speak English, but the language in these books has actually been written to support beginner learners as well as more advanced learners. So there's great support from the illustrations, which help the children to get meaning from the stories. And the fact that they're interesting stories, they can sustain many readings, makes them a really good vehicle for repetition and practice. Currently, I teach some university students. They're all students doing their MAs in various different disciplines. And they often say to me, oh, Helen, I went to school, a lot of them are from China. I went to school in China. We just did grammar exercises. We had very big classes. The teacher would talk, we would listen. We didn't get a chance to interact. And I was telling them about the use of stories, and they said that would be so valuable, because these are all people who, they're very, very smart students. They study really hard. But when they arrived in England to do their master's degrees, they really struggled with communication skills. So although they've all passed their IELTS exams and so on, most of their study was not on communication skills. They didn't get much opportunity to speak and to listen to English. So many of them struggled when they arrived here. And I think stories are a great way to support oral language development as well, because we can talk about stories, we can talk about the characters, we can predict what's going to happen next. And I think had those students had the opportunity to use stories in their classrooms in the way suggested by the First Steps program, they would have found communicating when they arrived in England a lot easier. Okay, Wenlin. Okay, so this brings us on to stories are a great way to bring English to life. Many students learn the mechanics, learn the grammar, learn how to write an essay, but they find that real life communication challenging. And I think this is where stories can really help build those skills from a very young age. And if we start young, it will help students later on as they progress through the primary grades, through secondary, onto university. They will develop very natural communication skills in English. Okay, Wenlin? Okay, great. The First Steps program actually comes with 3 activity books, because there are 3 levels. And I had a lot of fun writing these activity books, because I could be really creative with the sorts of activities that I put in there. Marshall Cavendish were great. They gave me free range to use a lot of different kinds of things. So we've got science activities, we've got games, we've got writing activities, a lot of creative stuff in there. It's not your typical fill in the blank kind of activity book program. These are activities that will get the children excited about using the language, that will recycle the language from the stories. There are also over 300 flashcards which help with the teaching of the phonics, and there's a whole list, I think if I remember rightly, of about 30 or 40 different ideas for flashcard games. So we're not just flashing up the flashcard, flash say. There are lots of games you can play, multi-sensory games that you can play with flashcards, again to make the learning interesting, because if students are interested in learning, they essentially learn better. If we're engaged in something, we learn it better. It's as simple as that. So all these activity ideas and game ideas come with the program, and they can be used with all of the different stories in a very flexible way. So in that way, it's a resource for the students, but it's also a resource for the teachers. You don't have to think so much, you know, it's given to you in the activity books and in the program guides. So I think that's really helpful. Okay, Wenlin? Okay, so almost to the end of the benefits. There are so many benefits. Stories provide lots of opportunities for saying language out loud. We have digital versions of the stories, we have print versions of the stories, and getting the children to read along with the story, getting them to share read it, to pair read it, to all the different kinds of reading. Again, ideas are given for this in the program guides, different ways you can use the stories with the children, and getting the children to say out the language so that they practice their pronunciation, they practice their intonation of the language, is a very, very useful use of the stories. That's great, Wenlin. Okay, so stories also provide a great vehicle for teaching phonics. I've done a lot of teacher training in Singapore, Malaysia, and China, and I know that phonics is often one of those things which is a bit of a mystery to teacher, and it's quite difficult sometimes because not all languages are phonetic. The Chinese languages, for instance, are not phonetic at all. Malay is phonetic, but phonetic in a slightly different way to English. I'm afraid I don't speak any of the Indian languages, so I can't comment whether they're phonetic or not. But none of the languages have the same phonetic system that English has. Now, a lot of phonic books and a lot of phonic reading series are basically very stilted. So you will have stories such as Pat the cat sat on the mat and ate a rat. He got very fat. It's not a real story. It's a story designed to teach the at sound, but it's not an interesting story. It doesn't have much meaning, and we always have to bear in mind we read for meaning. We don't read to be able to read, we read for meaning. And when we learn phonics and when we teach phonics to children, we're teaching them because it's a tool to help them to read and to spell. It's a tool to help them to write. So phonics it's a means to an end. It's not useful in itself, but it's useful when we're learning to read and to write and to spell. And these books present phonics. Each one has its own very clear phonic focus. It has activities that we can use to develop the phonic focus. For instance, the picture shows Go-Go the greedy goat. Obviously, this is one of the level 1 readers, and it's teaching the G sound. But it presents phonics. I think what's different about the First Steps series is it presents phonics in the context of meaningful stories. Stories that the children will be interested in their own right, and the phonics is embedded in the story. So this is different approach to teaching phonics to many of the traditional Pat the Cat Sat on the Mat stories, where the language is very contrived and unnatural. In our First Steps books and stories, the language is very natural. It's like a normal storybook, but the phonic focus is embedded in the story, and we can pull that out of the story if we want to teach that phonic focus. So it's something quite different in that way, actually. As I say, most phonic series, it's very contrived language, very unnatural language. And we have to think out to ourselves, do we want to be teaching the children unnatural language? I think not really. We want them to be able to communicate very naturally. So by embedding phonics in natural sounding stories, we tick both boxes, essentially. Okay, next one, Wenlin. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a sort of, I've talked a lot about the First Steps program. I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of the components of the First Steps program, and then we'll have a quick time to answer some questions. So, First Steps from Phonics to Reading, which aims to help young learners become communicators and independent readers. So this is the aim of the program. It's a language program, it's a phonics program, it's a reading program, it's all of those things rolled into one. So you're getting a lot of value for money for First Steps because you're not having to buy separate programs. Okay, next one, Wenlin. Okay, it comprises 75 stories, as I mentioned, 300 flashcards, over 600 activities. Each lesson and each story comes with songs and rhymes which complement the stories. There's the digital and the animated versions. So there's a lot of components to the program as a whole, which all work together, which are all integrated. Okay, next one, Lynn. Okay, so sorry, my camera, I'm just going to minimize this a little bit because I can't see. Okay, so the program guides, they provide really simple lesson instructions for the teacher. It's very teacher friendly. As I say, I've worked with teachers, experienced teachers, less experienced teachers for many, many years. And I know teachers are busy people. They have a lot of marking, a lot of preparation, a lot of admin, a lot of everything, a lot of students. And so the aim of this program guide is to make your life easier. The program guide is set out in such a way, there are 4 different areas, and I'll go into these in a minute, but you have a lead-in, you have what to do with the story, you have a main activity with some suggested additional activities, and you have a roundup for the lesson. So it's kind of your whole lesson plan done for you, but it's also flexible because some of you may have more time than others to, you know, for your English class or your language class. So some of you may only have time to do certain bits. So it's written in such a way that it can be used flexibly as well. The classroom slides also provide the software for you to do frontal teaching. So if in your context you use interactive whiteboards a lot, the lesson plan in simple pared down version is available for the interactive whiteboard as well, which is another really handy tool if that's the kind of methodology you're using. Okay, Wenlin? Okay, so teaching is easy, simple, and step by step. I mean, really, you could give this program to a teaching assistant, and providing they can read, they should be able to deliver it and teach the children some valuable skills. And that's the whole idea. A lot of the work is done for the teacher. Okay, Wenlin? Okay, so these are the 4 steps I was just mentioning. The lead in, it's a short activity to get the children interested in the theme. It's getting them ready for the theme of the story and for learning. It's allowing them to settle down, but at the same time to warm up. So each and every lesson has a lead in activity. And there are, let me think, 150 lessons provided. So 2 lessons for every one of the 75 stories are provided in this series. Then step 2 is the story itself, and the program guide kind of tells you how to use the story if you're not experienced using stories, some of the questions you might ask to get the maximum understanding and learning, how you can integrate the teaching of phonics into that. So again, it's very guided, lots of suggestions. If you're a more experienced teacher, it doesn't mean you can't use your own ideas. Of course you can, but these ideas are there if you want them, if they're useful to you. And then for the follow-up activities, again, they link back to the theme, they link back to the story. And they encourage children to practice the phonics, but they also take them beyond the phonics. There are writing activities, there are science experiments, there are little cooking things, there are all sorts of different activity ideas. So each lesson has a main activity and then 2 other activities. And you can choose to do those other activities in class if you have time, or you might just do one of them, or you might set them for homework. So in a way, they're not called homework in the program, but they're there as ideas that you may wish to give the children as home practice to consolidate some of the learning that's gone on in class. And then each lesson, as is good practice, has a round down activity. We recap on the key learning points with the children. This is called learner training. And we also do some sort of little warm down so that the children are kind of ready to go. And there's a consolidation of learning element in all of the round down activities. So this is the simple 4-step structure of each of the suggested lesson plans in all 3 of the program guides. Of course, the program guides, they're for 4 to 7-year-olds. They get increasingly more challenging, but there are ways to make them simpler or more complex depending on the level of your learners, and ideas are given for that too. Okay, Manin? It's very strange not having control of my own slides. Okay, so this is one of the activity books. This is the level 1 one, which we saw earlier. I think I mentioned lots of multisensory activities. I think some of the most exciting collections of activities that I've come across in activity books, which can often be quite dull and repetitive. These are not repetitive at all. They're really quite interesting and varied activities. Okay, Madeline? Okay, in the activity books at the back, we've got writing practice sheets because children do need to practice letter formation. So they do this alongside learning the phonics sounds. We have handwriting practice for words and phonemic awareness. We have activities when we say multisensory, such as the letter S, writing it in sand. I think the letter F, we write it in flower. So it's not always just a worksheet. There are lots of multisensory ways to do this as well. And I've included an example of a science activity there. So you can see they actually link this to floating and sinking, which the kids love. Lots of hands-on learning opportunities for the children. Okay, next one. Okay, this is just an example of a visual of the digital stories, a very easy to use interface for the teacher. So even if you're not confident about reading the story, or maybe in some cases if the teacher's not confident about speaking or pronouncing English, all the stories are recorded. So the teachers can play the story for the children.
Huh?
Hi, could you
Hey.
mute the mic, please? Huawei.
Oh, 7:50, 7:55.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Could you mute your mic, please? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, next one. Wenlin. Okay, so just a really quick overview, not going into too much detail here, but level 1 basically looks at the 26 letters of the alphabet and all of the initial sounds. They're not taught in the alphabetical order because we want children to be able to start to blend the sounds quickly together. So they're taught in an order where they can start to put sounds together at level 1 quite soon. But all 26 sounds are covered and taught. At level 2, the children move on to learning the digraphs and the high frequency consonant blends of English. And by level 3, they're learning diphthongs. They're learning beginning and ending sounds, which are more difficult for children to hear and produce. And they're doing a lot of blending the sounds together to make words. So it's progressive. There's built-in review into the program so that the children get a chance to revisit the phonics that they've already learned. And very quickly, even from level 1, they'll start to be able to blend sounds together, segment sounds, which is break them up, and to read words, to use phonics for decoding and to use phonics for spelling. Okay, Wenlin. Okay, as well as the phonics sounds, I felt it was really, really important to teach what we call high frequency words. And in the context of the First Steps from Phonics to Reading program, these we call ready reader words. At each level, there is a block of ready reader words, and these are words which, generally speaking, are the most common words in English, and many of them cannot be decoded phonetically. So if you take the word the, for instance, it's not a phonetic word. It comes up in every single book we read. It's not phonetic. So it's important that the children learn to recognize these words by sight and not have to try to decode them. So the lists get slightly longer with level 2 and even longer by level 3. By the end of level 3, the children will have learned and practiced and be able to recognize the 100 most commonly used words in the English language. And these words make up 50% of all written print. So if children can recognize these 100 words just like that, then they will already be well on their way to becoming fluent readers. Okay, so this is all embedded within the program. Okay, next one. Okay, that's it. So our next webinar, where we'll be looking at best practices in phonics and reading, will actually be on the 29th of May. I hope you'll be able to join us. I really have to apologize that we had a few little technical hitches right at the beginning of today. I'll speak with Wenlin and try and get those sorted out. I'm not sure what was going wrong with the slides there, because on my end they were sharing, on your end they didn't seem to be. So I'll figure that out with Wenlin from Marshall Cavendish. I hope you found today useful. We've got a little bit of time now for some questions and answers. If you have any burgeoning questions you would like to ask, I'm just going to put up my video again. Hold on, let me just get this up for you. Okay, that's great. And I'm just gonna, okay, view options. All right, so does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask about any of the points that I've made about either the value of using stories or the program itself? Does anyone have any questions? If you have a question, you'll need to unmute your mic to ask the question, which is at the top of your bar on your screen. Yeah, does anyone have any questions?
Helen, hello, my name is Karen. You said there are songs, chants and rhymes. Do you think those are useful in language learning, or are they just a bit of fun and a bit of a gimmick? What's your view on that?
No, Karen, that's a great question, actually. Thank you for asking that. Actually, the songs and the chants and the rhymes are a very, very important part of learning. I don't know about you guys, but I still remember songs that I learned in school to this day, even though I may not have heard the songs or used those songs for a long, long time. One of the powerful things about songs and rhymes and chants is how memorable they are. And because we've embedded these in each and every one of the lessons in the program, the children will get a huge exposure to language through the songs, through the rhymes, through the chants. They enjoy saying them. Again, it's another opportunity to say the language out loud. I am quite sure they'll go home singing the songs and chanting the chants and saying the rhymes. And this is all additional language practice. And really, it's so valuable because songs stick in our minds. And I'm sure many of you can remember songs that you sang. I can even remember a weird German song that I learned in school, and I haven't spoken German since I was 16 years old. So we have all of these wonderful songs and rhymes. What we've done is we've used familiar tunes and easy to sing tunes for the songs and rhymes, but we have our own lyrics, words, which relate back to the stories, so that the children can make that thematic connection with the story and the rhyme and the theme of the lesson. So I think they're a very, very important part of the program. It's something that will really help to make the learning stick. Thank you, Karen. That's a great question.
Thanks, sounds good. And sorry, Helen, you may have also said how long each of these books are, each of these stories. How many pages are they? Do you know?
Yeah, each of the stories is 12 pages long. And that goes right from levels 1 to 3. But of course, the language gets progressively a little more challenging, but the progression is gradual. And that has been done deliberately because we want the children to be exposed to language at a natural rate where they can absorb the language and practice the language without being pushed on really, really fast, as many programs do, and the children never catch up. So there is progression, but it's a progression which is at an age-appropriate level and which will certainly enrich the children's ability to learn and to use language communicatively. So 12 pages for each book at each level. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Wenlin, could you please just flash up the last slide? Okay, if you would like any information about the First Steps program, whether you'd like to see some examples of it in real life, or you're interested in perhaps looking at it with a view to purchasing, there's a couple of contacts on this screen. You can contact our China sales lead, Fang Jiandi, or you can contact Geraldine in Singapore. Their contact details are all there. And any sorts of inquiries about the program. Also, if you think of any questions after this seminar that you think, oh, I should have asked about this, which often happens to me, I think of the question when it's too late, please do get in touch with one of the sales team and just say, oh, you know, I meant to ask Helen about this. They'll either be able to answer your question directly or to send that question to me and I'll be able to answer it. So this needn't be the end of your opportunity to ask more questions. I know it can be a little off-putting to ask questions in this sort of setup on Zoom and so on. But I'd really like to thank all of you very much for attending today and for taking an hour out of your time to be with us and to learn about the First Steps from Phonics to Reading program. It's a program that I'm actually really personally proud of, and it's a program that I think has filled a gap in the market for something which ticks so many boxes. It ticks the phonic box, it ticks the language learning box, it exposes children to learning through stories, and I think it's going to be really valuable in helping teachers and in helping students. So thank you again very much. And I'd also like to say thank you to the team at Marshall Cavendish, actually. I get a lot of the kudos for doing these webinars.